Okay guys, welcome back to The Barren Grounds by David A. Robertson. We are on chapter 3. One thing that's interesting about this chapter is when I look at it right away, I see once again the picture of the Big Dipper that we saw back in chapter 1, I believe it was. So I wonder if there's some significance in that. I don't know. As a reminder, we're on the 3rd chapter, so after we are done reading and discussing it, you need to complete your fact, question, inference, connection sheet. So 3 events, or 3 quotes, or 2 events and 1 quote, 2 quotes and an event. Okay, if you come up with a quote from the story, what is your question about that quote? Inference. Try to answer this question. What do you think? And a connection. Try to connect back to that quote or that event. What can you connect to about that? Okay? So 3 events or quotes from the story, from the chapter, and question, inference, and connections to go along with them all. And they all must be filled in. All right, chapter 3. Here we go. Part 1. Morgan walked Eli to his locker as she'd done all week, fulfilling a promise she'd made to Katie and James. Just make sure he's settled, Katie had instructed. He clearly wasn't settled now, though. He carried his ruined illustrations with his head drooped, the intricate, expert pencil lines soiled by tire tracks across the paper. Eli's locker was at the far end of the school. Morgan had to pass by her own locker to get to his. It meant that she had to walk the distance of the school, all the way there and all the way back, navigating through swarms of grade 7s and 8s pushing in one direction or the other. To avoid them, Morgan engaged in a sort of dance. She wondered if Eli noticed this. How weird did she look, contorting her body to get through the crowd like she was a jewel thief trying to avoid 1,000 laser beams. Well, here you are. Morgan watched while Eli opened his locker and placed the drawings inside carefully, as if they were made of glass. Eli hung his backpack on one of the hooks inside the locker, then pulled out a binder and a textbook. Math. Morgan had English language arts, first period. All right, I'll see you at the front doors after school. Morgan moved to leave, then stopped and turned back. Or at lunch. She winced immediately. He had nothing to draw on anymore. I bet if you told Katie and James about what happened, they'd get you a new sketchbook, just like the one you had, she said quickly. Nothing could be like the one I had, he said. Okay, it won't be from family, but... She trailed off. All settled? Eli nodded. Yeah, sure. This is pretty important up here, where Morgan is saying to Eli, well, they can get you another sketchbook, just like the one you had. And he says, nothing could be like the one I had. It's similar to the way that Morgan's feeling, where she's gone from home to home to home to home, and she still feels empty because nothing can be like the one you had, and nothing will fill it. Okay, and so Eli realizes that about his sketchbook. No sketchbook will fill the emptiness now that he feels after his sketchbook has now been destroyed. So here's that Big Dipper again. When Morgan got to her locker, it was 8:47 a.m. Her class was just across the hall, so with all the time in the world, she stuck her head inside her locker like a middle school ostrich. The more time she could spend there, the fewer students would be around when she crossed the hallway. We see Morgan really does not want to interact with people. She doesn't talk to people. She doesn't eat lunch with people. In the hallway, she does everything she can to not physically bump into somebody or even make eye contact with anybody. And now here, she's hiding pretty much in her locker. She's got her head stuck into the locker, and it's like it's a shield. She can use it to protect herself from everything else that's out there. Okay? The contents of Morgan's locker consisted of a neat stack of binders and textbooks, a magnetized mirror on the inside of the door that she used to keep an eye on who was coming up behind her, rather than to check for zits, a page-sized poster of her favorite band taped to the back of the locker, and her class schedule taped above that. A few minutes passed before Logan decided it was safe to move. She hung her backpack from a hook and had started to pull out the book and binder she needed for ELA when she spotted someone approaching in the mirror. So she uses the mirror. Everybody else has a mirror up and they're checking for zits, they're checking their makeup, they're checking their hair. She's checking to see who's coming behind her. Morgan trusts no one. No one. It was Emily Holdsworth. And instead of just walking past Morgan to get to their class for some reason, Emily stopped. Morgan looked away from the mirror to avoid eye contact because Emily was just standing there. Morgan hoped that Emily would move on, but she didn't. "Good morning, Ghost," Emily said. Morgan turned around in slow motion to face Emily. This was happening, and there was nothing Morgan could do to avoid it. Ghost? Had the other kids given her a nickname? Emily must have read her confusion. "I'm just used to giving people nicknames," she said, then provided a final one-word explanation. "Hockey." Right. Morgan was left to figure out what ghost meant, but it wasn't exactly a crazy riddle to solve. Yeah, it's actually a pretty fitting nickname for Morgan. Ghost. She is like a ghost at her school. She's like a ghost at her house. She's just there, but she's not really interacting with anybody. She's not making a personal connection. She's just there. Emily looked Morgan over, head to toe. "I love those pants." Ripped jeans? Morgan thought. What's to love? "They look like authentic rips," Emily said, "not store-bought rips. That's an important distinction. Well played." Thanks. Morgan looked over Emily's wardrobe. She was a short, white girl with the physique of a gymnast. She had wavy, dirty blonde hair tied back into a loose ponytail, an ice cube shirt that, Morgan was certain, was meant to be ironic, a pair of canvas sneakers, and black yoga pants. Morgan felt she should reciprocate, even if Emily didn't look as though she expected it, but she didn't know what to say. Cool shirt, Morgan thought, as if Emily could read her mind. Morgan wasn't sure if Emily talked to her because they were locker neighbors or if Emily was actually just nice. When she dissected it, she thought it was likely the latter. So that means the former means the first thing she said, so that they were locker neighbors. Latter means the last thing she said, and it was that Emily was actually nice. So she thinks Emily's actually nice. Emily never sounded sarcastic or like talking to Morgan was something she'd been put up to. And the new nickname didn't seem malicious. Emily wore a spring jacket for a AAA hockey team, even when it was hot outside, and she said it like they were teammates. Like Morgan might call Emily something like Holdsy. "Hey," Emily waved her hand in front of Morgan's face. "Earth to Ghost." "Sorry," Morgan said. "That's all right," Emily said. "It's like when I see you with one of your books, totally in another world." "It's not that I'm bored of you," Morgan blurted out, bored of you. Morgan cringed. Was there a hole she could crawl into? Could she actually stuff her head into the locker? I like your shirt. Thanks. It's ironic, Emily said. Morgan caught herself laughing. Emily looked surprised by it. For some reason, this made Morgan want to hide even more. She checked the time on her phone, 8:56 a.m. We should go sit down, Morgan said. Did you finish your poem? Emily asked. Yeah. Instead of reading a book last night, she'd taken her pink Hilroy scribbler, dusted it off, literally, and worked on it for a few hours in the attic, in the exact spot she usually sat to read. The lights weren't installed up there yet, so she used a mix of moonlight and street light. I kind of just threw 4 stanzas together. Okay, so it sounds like they had some homework and they had to write a poem. What? I worked on mine all week. They stopped at the classroom door. I need to get an A. Don't you always get A's? Morgan asked. Emily shrugged. I don't get A's. I don't play hockey. That's the rule. Morgan put her hand on the doorknob. She could see through the windows that the class was full and ready to start. Mrs. Edwards was at her desk, shuffling papers. Want to read mine? Emily asked. Why? I just really want to hear yours, Emily admitted. Thought you'd offer. You read so much, you must be awesome at writing. Oh, I don't. Morgan could feel the poem she'd written last night stuffed into her back pocket. She ripped it out of the Hilroy scribbler that morning and put it in there. Just because I read doesn't, I like to write. It's just that, it's all right, Emily said. Don't worry about it. Okay, we're going to leave that off there for part 1 of chapter 3. So here we've met another character named Emily who plays hockey and seems to like Morgan, even though Morgan is sure that nobody could possibly like her. So hopefully we get to learn a little bit more about Emily, and hopefully this is the start of a friendship for Morgan. All right, guys, take care, and I'll see you for part 2.